Gata on opening the sutra. The Dharma profound and infinitely subtle is rarely counted even in millions of ages. Now we see it, hear it, receive, maintain it. May we completely realize Tathagata's true meaning.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you very much for being here and practicing. I'm often have a hallucinated memory of moments in the Dharma's history where things pull in and the teacher gathers with a very few dedicated disciples, typically in hiding. Persecutions are a real thing. Persecutions happen. The emperor is, who's been so favorable, say, passes away, and the second cousin has done a coup and taken over and is now emperor and wants to make a clear mark from the past, and so off with their heads. And many situations like that, some less dramatic. There's always the banal things of famine and pestilence, disease, war, not directly tied to things, but there are these moments where, Dogen, for example, the Tendai sect, very threatened by his presence, took some of their armed guards and burned his shop down. He had to run in hiding. He had the temple seal and his transmission documents, and he was in hiding. And of course, they wanted those things because those are the symbols of spiritual authority in this tradition. Kind of echoes a time centuries before when the sixth ancestor received the Dharma and the robe and had to hightail it out of there. Anyway, these moments happen where Dogen, say, finds himself in this backwater, no place area with a handful in the deep snows in the mountain. And that's where most of the Shobo Genzo happened. Maybe a modern version, Suzuki Roshi, many here will have encountered Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind. Those talks were delivered in a student's garage to a handful of folks. One of the most influential Zen books, I would say, in the 20th century, in terms of Dharma coming to the West. And I can feel those moments. And I take great consolation and courage from them. There are natural pulses, the heartbeat, clench and then relax, pump and relax. The important thing is to know how to meet the moment you're in and actually meet it well. And that's easy. It always comes back to the Buddha Dharma. Very simple. And as I often have said many times, the plush, lush times are actually more dangerous. Something very clarifying, no, about the cold of winter. Nature pulls itself in. Options are reduced. A simple focus: conserve the power and stay. Remain. Spring's already happening. It's just not here yet. Right now, it's deep snow practice. And if I'm honest, it's among my favorites. We continue with the Lankavatara Sutra, if you'll recall from yesterday. Had to do with looking at different mistakes that people make. And there was a whole host of them, primarily critiquing what are referred to here as philosophers. People who try to think their way through it, and that's their main gear in. And the concluding moment there was the only result of this effort is that it sets the mind to wandering about and becoming more confused, as nirvana is not to be found by mental searching. And the more the mind becomes confused, the more you confuse others. And if you're good at it and you attract a large following and you confuse a whole bunch of people that approve of each other's confusion, now you have real trouble. But now we move on to a higher quality of mistake. The sutra does. As to the notion, the sutra continues, of nirvana held by disciples and masters who still cling to the notion of an ego self and who try to find it by going off themselves into solitude. Their notion of nirvana is an eternity of bliss, like the bliss of the samadhis for themselves. Now let's look at this a little bit. Now the Buddha, the sutra is elucidating that there are even people now not just stuck in mere philosophical speculation land and trading in ideations as currency. No, there are those that move further than that, even called disciples and masters. But they still cling to this notion of an ego self. So what does this mean, this clinging to a notion of ego self? What's that talking about? You see, one of the most important distinctions that the Lankavatara Sutra brings to us is what are called the Eightfold Mind System. This particular way of thinking about our experience. Eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, mind. This will be familiar to us from our Heart Sutra. The Lankavatara keeps going, remembering here that mind in this case means the perceiver of thoughts and feelings, thinking and emotions. That's in eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, mind, or brain, you could say. I think it lines up a little more closely to say it brain. It just sounds clinical. Eye, ears, nose, tongue, body, brain. It's less poetic, so, poetry matters. But actually, as a diagnostic, the brain actually is far closer as an organ of perception, like the eye or the ear or the nose. And that organ of perception's business is generating and perceiving thoughts and feelings, okay? From the perspective of the sutra's teaching, which is here to help us alleviate suffering. So upaya all around. But above that we don't chant in the Heart Sutra every time, is manas and alaya. Okay? Now manas is the next level of mind. Eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, brain, manas. Now what is this manas? Well, it's ego self. It's what the translator is trying to point to with the word ego self. But don't think of it simply in the psychological term of, oh, you have a big ego. It's not that simple. It's something very different, I think. My experience is it's very different. Manas itself is that implied feeling we have of a self that is the perceiver of emotions, feelings, and thoughts. It is that sense of self. You know, the one who's doing the ruminating, the one who's feeling the feels. That, the thinker, the feeler. The level below is that which perceives the thoughts and the feelings. The level above, so to say, is that sense of you being the one who's feeling these things. The sense of ever-present I am-ness. And this is deeply supported by the appearance of things in mind, form, which then gets name, which then gets discrimination. The form and the name, you could say, is maybe that lower level, and the discrimination is this upper level. This is the discriminating mind, the mind that says, oh, I'd hate this feeling, get it out of me. Or I love this feeling, bring me more. Or this is logical, this is what we do. This is not logical, this is not what we do. And it's a very important distinction to make, because what you're going to see happens here is the sutra points out that there's one very, very important, somewhat high-level, quote-unquote, mistake, which is to conflate this manas mind, this implied sense of self, with actual tathagata garbha, the womb of suchness, Buddha nature. Yes, yes, everything is Buddha nature, I know, but please be clear. If you land what you think is your Dharma eye, and you actually are plugged into this false sense of self, mistaking it for Buddha nature, then this is not your Dharma eye talking. This is clinging to ego self. Remember, it's prajna that sees Buddha nature, suchness, clear light, non-conceptual, luminous, self-aware, blissful, empty Buddha nature wisdom mind. Tathagata garbha, suchness, thusness, it's beyond names, universal mind. That is not your sense of yourself as a self. Of course, yes, everything is it. We all hear that all the time, and it's important to realize that. But what this sutra goes on to explain, and we'll unpack as we go along here, is that if you actually are landed unknowingly into this self-sense, and that's the basis of what you're practicing and how you're practicing, you get very, very different results than if you're actually landing in and orienting towards true Buddha nature. So how would you tell the difference? Well, let's read it again. As to the notion of nirvana is held by disciples and masters, it's an advanced goof to make, frankly, right? So it's a warning to all of us. You can have some depth and be senior and be completely out of the loop. It happens. As to the notion of nirvana or Buddha nature or awakening, say, held by disciples and masters who still cling, it's not the notion of ego self, to the experience of I am sense, and who try to find their nirvana, what they do is they go off by themselves into solitude. Their notion of awakening, of Buddha nature, is eternal bliss, like the bliss of samadhis, for themselves. think about it, if you're unknowingly landing in that ever-present sense of self, the thinker, the feeler, as being the mind with which everything expresses, then what ends up happening is we withdraw, the sutra says. We end up thinking, feeling that what we need to do is get to this bliss of the samadhi, the deep, relaxed presence feeling that can come at a session like this. Now again, I'd like to emphasize there's nothing wrong with the self-sense mind. It's beautiful. I am, yo. It's nice. And there's nothing wrong with samadhi. In fact, you need some. It's necessary to the path. It's partial, though. And the trouble comes when we take a partial thing and invest in it like it's the only thing we need. So what ends up happening is a person who's kind of caught in this, they end up practicing for themselves. I really need sesshin because it's good for me. And that's all there is to say. Now, it's good for me to do sesshin. And what else? There's a lot more there, hopefully. But if it only goes that far, it's not fully developed, that's all. I mean, with so much chaos and tumult in the world and so much churn and burn, to long after the bliss of deep sesshin is natural and wholesome, and I share it. But don't be satisfied with that. That's a step on the ladder in. That's not the landing pad. That's all. Going further, they recognize that the world is only a manifestation of mind and that all discriminations are of mind, which is one of the central teachings of the whole sutra. Buddha is mind. No Buddha, no mind. You should know these tunes. They're there for a reason. Which mind is this person feeling when they say this, though? This is what's different. They recognize that all discriminations are mind, everything is a manifestation of mind, but when they say that, what they're actually thinking of is their implied sense of self as being that mind that everything is an expression of. So if you were to take that sense you have of yourself as a self and inflate that as the source of all things in the universe, this is massive spiritual egoism. This is not the same thing as I alone am the world-honored one, not at all. When the Buddha made that statement, he's firmly in Buddha nature expressing it. And this is where you have to be very, you need a guide and a friends to help. So they recognize that everything is mind, mind only. Sure. Me. My mind. And of course, they wouldn't necessarily say it like that. Some would. They recognize that the world is only a manifestation of their sense of self-mind, and that all discriminations are of that mind. And so, what do you get from that? You forsake all social relations. Again, it impels one towards retracting. They practice various spiritual disciplines, and in solitude, they seek self-realization of noble wisdom by their own effort. You see, this is one of the big things that really we need to come to firm grips with. This is not going to happen just by your own effort. Okay? You need to bring your effort. Oh, yeah. But what about Tara? What about Buddha? What about Manjushri, Kuan Yin, Vajrasattva, Fudomyo? Of course, they're all you, but not yet. See, one of the things that happens when the training is ripe and correct is there's this three-dimensionality in relation. And frankly, it's extremely demanding. Conversations can be very difficult. Community life can be very difficult. Practicing in residency can be very challenging. Practicing anywhere is challenging. Being alive is challenging. But this seeking of what they think awakening is, a projection of their own sense of their selfhood, leads them to be isolated from others and to do this with their own effort. I mean, after all, what bodhisattva do you need if they're all just your mind? This small alaya mind, Manu's mind, rather. So they follow the stages up to the sixth in this organizational frame, and they attain the bliss of samadhi. They can sit. They can get into a deep state of relaxation and focus. But they're still clinging to egoism. So this bliss of the samadhis that's being referenced is not the blissful, luminous, self-aware Buddha mind. You need to be very clear about that. There is a sacred and holy, I would say, relief that comes in the bliss of samadhi. It's good stuff. And it's necessary for your mind to settle down enough for you to do the work of awakening. But don't park there. Don't put all your chips on that square. It's partial. See? So this clinging to egoism, because they are still clinging to egoism, because they still are looking at all things are manifestations, not of Buddha mind, but of their mind, their ego mind. They do not attain the, quote, turning about at the deepest seat of consciousness. Because the turning about in the deepest seat of consciousness has to do with shifting your perception from that self-sense thinker, feeler mind to your Dharma eye for real. It's in your hara. It's in your danchen. And that shift is the turning about that's being pointed at over and over. It's getting your Dharma eye open and functioning. And that's what all these crazy koans are about. That's what all the practices are about. And you know, it's a very bitter pill to swallow, but the fact is you can practice half-heartedly and somewhat correctedly for a very long time and make very little progress in this matter. I'm sorry, but that is true. You may have the benefit of some relief in samadhi. You may have the good feelings that come sometimes from practice and so on, and that's lovely. But the business of awakening, what is the difference between a feeling and a Dharma eye flash? Do you know? Do you know what is the difference between a thought and an impulse from the Dharma eye? Do you know? Can you tell? Where is this coming from? This response to this koan. You don't solve a koan. That's a silly thing to think. You respond to it. Where is that response coming from? And that's what the Zen training has to do with. It's training you and me to start to actually feel when that Dharma eye is functioning and when it's not, and so that you can actually tell the difference. Because believe me, it doesn't just obliterate your emotions and your thoughts, thank goodness. There's nothing wrong with them. They too are it. We say it over and over. But don't let that be a bypass for the work. And the work actually is play. We really dance the koans. We play the koan. We illumine forms and their nature together. It's a wondrous thing here in the deep snows together. Now, I know it's sometimes one of these little phrases of joy. It just lingers a little too long, like some unwelcome bit of sand in the gears, but I tell you, a pearl comes from it. But what is the difference? Why is it that one response gets approval and the other doesn't? It's not just that you guessed what the ancestors want you to guess. It's not a charades game. Really, if you think of it that way, if you think about it like a game, you can actually derail your entire koan study. If you think about it like an intellectual puzzle, you can train yourself to think about these koans and be very disruptive to your practice. It's not a game. I do believe it has its etymology in a game. I think it was a court game in China at some point, something like pantomimes or something. And some awakened person was like, I think I can use that. And they did. So it's a skillful means. It's not the only one. The Buddha never sat there in Doksan with anybody, you know. Makai Shapa didn't work through the gateless gate. It hadn't happened yet. But nevertheless, as the Dharma goes tumbling through the centuries, upaya evolve, skillful means develop. And this business of awakening is that important. So this turning about in the deepest seat of consciousness can't happen because they're still using self-effort. It's not free of the discriminating mind. They do not attain the turning about at the deepest seat of consciousness, and therefore they are not free from the thinking mind. So that's why, you hear all these admonishments about don't judge your practice. Because someone trapped in this will be like, yeah, it feels good. My practice is great. Oh, it feels bad. My practice needs to be improved. Everything is gauged on how they're feeling or how they think, let's say. This is completely makes sense. I'm doing well. My practice is good. It's all lines up. You can make your characterization of it. But it's a real trap if you get your thoughts and your feelings kind of aligned and working around this sense of self as being the ultimate truth of things, and you keep reifying that. You have to do that alone, because believe me, everybody else gets in your way when you're thinking like that. People are pesky. They don't agree. Awakened mind, no problem. My mind everywhere? Well, how can you be saying no to me? Wait a minute, I'm out of here. Therefore, they are not free from the thinking mind and the accumulation of habit energy. That's the spooky part. If you know what that's pointing to, that's the hair-raising one, such as the hair is. they're still accumulating karmic habit energy patterns. And they're not good. This is the classic critique of what some people think Zen is, when in fact it's exactly one of the mistakes that Zen also points out. But if somebody is sitting there just escaping the flames for a while, self-reifying in a very evolved kind of way, that's a lot of karma. And the funny thing about karma is it must work itself out. And it will, one way or the other. So they do not attain this turning about at the deepest seat of consciousness, and therefore they are not free from the thinking mind and the accumulation of habit energy. See, it's that thinker, discriminator mind, that intention in there that keeps generating this habit energy, you see. And every time that happens, it kind of like puts a seed into the storehouse consciousness, the way this is talked about. And that's the final level of mind, okay? Eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, brain, say, self-sense, ego, mind, and then storehouse consciousness, right? So experiences come, thoughts and feelings arise, discriminations arise, and those discriminations lead to actions that then plant seeds in storehouse, and the whole thing keeps generating. You see? Now, clear light, luminous bliss mind doesn't generate any habit energy patterns at all. None. Clinging to the bliss of samadhis, they pass into what they think is nirvana, but it is not the nirvana of the Tathagatas. Tathagata means suchness, thusness, okay? Tathagata Garbha means the womb of thusness. And as I've been saying all along here, these terms are all different flavors of the same thing. Clear light, thusness, non-conceptual thusness, luminous thusness, self-aware. Remember our ancestor yesterday, non-empty emptiness, self-aware. When everything is emptied, something can't be emptied. What is that thing? It's not your ego. Although for you on a given day, maybe. Me too. But that's not the ultimate answer here. They are those who have, quote, entered the stream, but they must return again to continue. So they got some distance in, but don't be satisfied. And this speaks to a very challenging point that I've seen in my entire tenure as a practitioner and being in Sangha life. The most difficult part of training is to get started. That's by far the hardest, most unlikely thing to ever happen, that you'd actually start. That's by far the most challenging thing, to actually encounter the Dharma and to be resonant with it and to have the causes and conditions where you can actually do something and to actually choose to do something about it. The odds are there's just no way that's going to happen. Unless, of course, it's inevitable for you. And then I bow to you, and I'm grateful to be in your presence. But once that most difficult barrier is passed, there's kind of a fairly long period of courtship, I would say. The robes are new, the incense is exotic, the rites are sparkly and fresh. You've never seen or felt these things. Something in you is singing in that key. And then, as I often say, enjoy that, and I hope it ends quickly because we have to get to work. Time is moving quickly. And it's important not to take the emotional feelings of any of that experience to be what it's about. I have very devotional and beautiful feelings, frankly, about the Dharma, and I'm grateful for them and I love them, but that's not what this is about. It's knowing who is the feeler, really. What are those feelings, really? That's where the actual freedom is. Because as much as those feelings come, they go. And then what? To conclude, I'm going to bring up the 38th ancestor, Master Tozan. Old Tozan. (807 to 869), puts him in the late Tang dynasty, a little earlier than our ancestor from yesterday. The actual founder of the Chaodong Chan sect, which became Soto Zen. So the founder of Soto Zen. He's associated rightly with the five ranks of Master Tozan, which is the penultimate effort in the koan curriculum at stage 9 in our way of organizing. Founder of the silent illumination way of practice. He said this: thus, good people, by inspecting fully, you become keenly aware of this subtle consciousness. It is called non-sentient. It is called non-sentient because there is no running off after sounds and forms, and no bondage to passionate consciousness. This principle must be preached carefully. Now listen to what he's saying in light of what the sutra has been saying lately here with us, right? Thus, good practitioners, by inspecting fully, by really practicing deeply, you become keenly aware of this subtle consciousness. And he's not pointing to that self-sense of I am. He's pointing to Buddha mind, okay? That's what teachers always do. You become keenly aware of this subtle consciousness, and the term he's going to come up with here is non-sentient. But it's called non-sentient because there's no running off and chasing after forms, sounds, sights, smells, tastes, touches, thoughts, feelings. There's no chasing after any of that stuff. There's no experience or of those things sorting and stacking to yes and no, good and bad, up and down, high and low. That's all this other stuff. There's something else. There's a different ground here. It's called non-sentient because there's no running off after sounds and forms, no bondage to passionate consciousness. Remember, the Buddha said, the world burns, dear one. Your mind burns to experience. The eye burns to see, the ear burns to hear, and on. The body burns to feel. Your brain burns to think. And let's say your heart center burns to feel. In a way, from this perspective, it's the most natural thing in the world to just live in that samsaric land of stimulus, response, feels, and thoughts, discriminations, up and down and choosing. But what the Buddha says, the first noble truth, all of that stuff is forever unsatisfactory. There's no stacking the deck in that actually satisfies anything for any durable amount of time. Satiated, sure, for a minute. I enjoy me a good wave of satiation now and then. But don't be fooled. Please don't bet your life on that. You will lose. not only will you lose, everyone who has to live in the wake of what you could have become loses. This potential unrealized. That's not acceptable. Not to me. I hope not to you. This principle, Master Tozan says, must be preached carefully. Therefore, when you hear preaching about the non-sentient, don't think this refers to fences and walls. It is simply when you are not attached to emotion or thought. It is simply when you are not clinging to emotions and thoughts, and your perceptions, therefore, are not scattered. The subtle consciousness is clear and unobstructed, clearly and distinctly luminous. Distinctly and clearly luminous, the founder of the subtle illumination, silent illumination. Silent illumination? What's the silence about? Is that just kind of shut up for a while? Is that stamp your thoughts down so they don't rise anymore? Suppress all your feelings? No. No, that's not the silence of silent illumination at all. It's this it's this mind that is not chasing or running from, because there is no running off or away from, I would add, sounds and forms. That's the silent part. That's the still part. That's the unmoved mover. It is simply that when you are not attached to emotion and thought, your perceptions are not scattered, the subtle consciousness is clear and bright. Does that phrase ring? I want you to taste that. Feel it. Live from it. This clear and bright, luminous you. Even though you attempt to grasp this realm, it is not possible. that thought, feeling mind and the discriminator mind this is not going to fit inside those containers. Look, it's a sweet abacus, but it's not going to do calculus. It just can't. Ain't going to happen. Even though you attempt to grasp it. Wrong, 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 wrong. Since this true Buddha mind is not bound by form, it does not exist in that way. Even though you attempt to get rid of it, you can't leave it. Since it's not bound by form, it doesn't exist. Even though you attempt to get rid of it, you can't be free of it. So, be very careful. Be very mindful. We should know how it comes to us, this food. Is this feelings? Is this thoughts? Is this coming from my sense of myself? Okay, we can say ego. I prefer manas. That implied self that rises from all these distinctions. Or is this coming from the Dharma eye? And watch out, because that Dharma eye, it may well flash something that your emotions don't like, or your mind objects to. Well, That's the work. What's the difference between having a feeling about something and having your Dharma eye respond to it? What's the difference between thinking something through, which I wish more people did better, including me, and having your Dharma eye respond, encounter one Dharma, practice one Dharma? Do you know? Well, let's find out.
Beings are numberless. I vow to free them. Delusions are inexhaustible.